friends, welcome to my May wrap-up video. I know it's a little bit late because I was sick in June at the start of it and I lost my voice for a long time and I'm still just getting back to it, so my voice is a bit croaky. But without having to delay it any further, let us get into the wrap-up of May, because I read 11 books and I'm here to talk about it with you and also give you my ratings and recommendations if they are good or not. So let's get started. Alright, this first book is quite popular on Book Talk and with the romanticy girlies. It Happened One Summer by Tessa Bailey. This is a steamy small town romance about Piper, an LA party girl with big influence energy who gets shipped off to a sleepy fishing town in Washington for what is essentially a reality check. Think The Simple Life, but with more sea air, more plaid, and a suspicious number of emotional unavailable fishermen. After her stepfather cuts her off, Piper is forced to run her late father's dive bar in Westport, where she immediately crashes headfirst into Brendan, a grumpy sea captain. So like every enemies to lovers opposite attract rom-com ever written, Brendan takes one look at Piper and decides she is annoying blonde disaster in expensive boots. Piper meanwhile takes one look at Brendan and is like, unfortunately, this is a man. He's also still wearing his wedding band from years ago, but his wife has passed away a while, maybe I think 7 years. So naturally, the book throws in that classic question, is he brooding? Is he emotional? Is he constipated? Or a bit of both? And the answer is yes to all of those questions. They're forced into close proximity. He's grumpy, she's sunshine, and the tropes enter the chat at full volume. If you like a romance that knows exactly what it is and confidently just struts into every familiar setup, then this book absolutely commits to that bit. Piper is definitely, I think, the heart of the novel for me. She is spoiled, of course, but not in that unbearable way. She's loyal, she's funny, she's deeply protective of her sister Hannah, and she has that very rare rom-com heroine quality of being a little bit extra but not exhausting. She rolls into this tiny town dressed like she's late for a yacht party and somehow still wins people over just by being fully herself, which is honestly kind of nice and iconic to read about. Brendan, on the other hand, fortunately was not my favorite. I understand that the grumpy fisherman routine is meant to be appealing, but it didn't work for me in this book. If a man likes you, I would prefer he says that with his chest, or at least stop acting like you're personally ruining his day by just existing there. So this is a romantic story, so please learn to communicate rather than just grunting at the girl. And then we hit the third act of miscommunication, which is my mortal enemy for tropes. Nothing makes me age faster in a romance than two grown adults refusing to have an honest conversation. Instead, we get people storming off, wounded pride, and all the emotional regulation of a man kicking a pebble down the road. And it's not sexy, it's just exhausting. Overall, I think Piper and Brendan as a couple are just okay for me. The chemistry didn't feel especially fresh. The banter leans a little bit too cliched at times. And some of the romantic lines made me cringe instead of swoon. The whole, oh, your hugs are like a recharging station thing, I wasn't very much into reading about that. I know it was meant to be cute, but I had to spiritually leave my body or skip over the line to get through it. What I actually did love was pretty much Piper and Hannah's sister relationship. Their dynamic was warm. I think it was loyal and genuine. There was a lot of heart in it. And it's probably the reason why I gave this book a 3-star rating at the end of it. Alright, so my second book for the month was The House in the Cerulean Sea. Oh, I have a lot of trouble with that word. It is by TJ Klune in a whimsical, cozy fantasy about prejudice and belonging. There's a lot of themed about found family wrapped in the emotional aesthetics of a warm blanket and a cup of tea you didn't have to make yourself. The story follows Linus Baker, a painfully rule-following caseworker for the department in charge of magical youth. Decopony, I think, is the abbreviation that they use a lot in the book, which sounds fake, but is unfortunately his real job. So he's like a public servant in this book, very square, very follow the line of the book. He gets set on a highly classified assignment to a secluded island orphanage to assess 6 supposedly dangerous magical children, and the mysterious caretaker whose name is Arthur. Linus arrives expecting administrative nightmare and possibly doom, and instead finds himself a place so charming it basically forces him into a full emotional software update of his brain. Now, the absolute best part of this book for me was, without a doubt, the children. This cast of chaotic little weirdos steals every scene that they're in and somehow manages to be both hilarious and deeply tender at the same time. They bring the humor, the heart, and most of the emotional damage in the best possible way. Now, my absolutely favorite character was Talia, the tiny gnome, menacing with her shovel. So she's like a little girl, but in a gnome's body. So she has a little beard and all that stuff. And obviously gnomes are known for gardening because they're gardening gnomes. And she is very good with gardening, but she's also good with shoveling. And she uses it as a threat to anyone that she doesn't like to shovel a little grave for them and then push them in there. And that's how she sort of resolves all her issues, by threatening them with hitting them over a shovel and then digging a grave and putting them in there. She spends pretty much half the book threatening violence in a way that should be alarming, but it somehow just deeply is enduring to hear about. Under all that gremlin little energy, she's fiercely protective, unexpectedly funny, and weirdly sweet. I also love the way her bond with Linus develops over time in the book, especially through these little quieter moments where she might cling to his hand when she's scared, or Matter Factory declares there is nothing wrong with being round because Linus is a little bit round in the tummy and so is she, and that's really adorable to read about. Lucy was another standout character for me. He is basically the Antichrist because I think Lucy is short for Lucian or Lucifer because that is the son of who he is. He is about 6 years old in the book. He's very dramatic. He's obsessed with record players and somehow gives off the energy of a tiny theater kid with access to destructive level powers. He does threaten Armageddon a lot in the book, but sometimes it's just something that he does to be dramatic rather than being real about it. He definitely does win not only my heart, but the Linus's heart in here as well. I think the rest of the ensemble of the kids are just as adorable. Chansey is a character who has been made to feel like a monster his entire life, because think about a character that looks like Flubber with two little blobby eyes at the top of his head, but his only dream is to be a hotel bellhop and be helpful, which is somehow both devastating and adorable at the same time. Then you've got Theodore, the tiny dragon who hoards buttons like they are rare treasures under his couch, and he's almost pretty much perfect. Even though he doesn't speak, he does communicate a lot of adorableness through the book. Together, the children create the emotional heart of the book, I think, and that found family dynamic is what makes the whole story feel so warm and memorable. Where this book fell short a little bit for me was the romance. While it absolutely shines when it comes to platonic love, chosen family, and emotional healing, the central romance subplot just didn't hit the way I wanted it to. Linus and Arthur totally make sense as partners in life, as caretakers, and as a team, but romantically, I was just not feeling the spark. It felt much more like watching two people build a lovely co-parenting arrangement than witnessing a sweeping love story that you might read about in other books. And potentially, a lot of that came down to a bit of tell versus show problem here. The book tells us Linus is falling in love with Arthur and is captivated by him, but it doesn't quite give those tiny charged moments that make a romance come alive. I needed a little more yearning, I think, from either one or the other party, a little bit more tension between maybe little touches, little glances, and at least one moment where I closed the book and went, so we are feeling things here, but I never did. Overall, this was a 4-star read for me. It's a deeply comforting, whimsical story that absolutely shines through its unforgettable cast of magical children and its beautiful found family heart. If you are here for coziness, charm, and emotional healing, this book will probably wrap you up like a little hug, I would say. Next is Molka by Monica Kim, which I do a total recap over here, so I will show you the link to that in my description. It is a sharp, disturbing horror thriller that takes feminine rage and gives it a knife and points it directly at a terrifying real modern horror that is actually true based on real life events. Set in Seoul, the story follows Daya, a young woman who thinks she has found a fairy tale romance with a wealthy boyfriend, only to have her life destroyed when the intimate moments between them two are leaked online via a spy camera, a real life phenomenon known in Korea as Molka. As this boyfriend of hers flees society when the video is leaked, she is left all on her own to face it, and her life spirals out of control and she becomes the target of Jong-yo, a deeply misogynistic IT technician who secretly likes to film women in their office building. Nothing but a systemic injustice, Daeyi's grief morphs into a ravenous desire for vengeance. So yes, if you're after a light, breezy time, this is not that book. First, like I said in my other recap, the characters do feel a little bit flat. Daeyi comes across as painfully naive and heartbreakingly desperate to be loved, while Jongwoo and several of the other men were walking red flags from the get-go. If you're looking for layered psychological portraits and delicate nuances, this is probably the point where you start side-eyeing the book and thinking that it's a little bit heavy-handed. But the more I sit with it, the more I realize that there isn't really a flaw so much as a deliberate choice, I would say, by the author. Monica Kim is not trying to build a soft, tragic character study that invites you to quietly pity the character. She strips the character back on purpose so that the book can focus with brutal clarity on what it actually wants to expose. The systemic ugliness of misogyny, digital exploitation, and the way violence against women gets normalized, excused, and absorbed into everyday life, especially in Seoul. Making all these men typically entitled and cruel boys, the novel shifts your reaction away from sadness and straight into fury. This is not a book that wants you gently mourning what Daeyi has lost. It wants you to rage, and honestly, that anger is where the book is the strongest. It turns what could have been a standard revenge filler into something much more pointed and politically sharp, in my opinion. So initially, this hovered around a 3-star read because I thought the characters were a bit flat. But if you sat in it and noticed that the author intentionally stripped back character work, focus of what this book is actually doing is pushing me back up to a 4-star. For me, Molka works because it is furious, unsettlingly, and absolutely committed to making sure you live with that anger sitting in your chest for the injustice of the women. So after that Molka book, I wanted something a little bit more lighter for sure and cozier, which is what brought me to And Now Back to You by B.K. Borison. B.K. Borison's new book, which is the sequel to the First Time Caller book, and it's in part of the series of Heartstrings series, and it's all about being opposite attracting in this novel. The novel pairs up competing Baltimore meteorologist Jackson Clark, who works in a structured radio booth, and Delia Stewart, a chaotic, optimistic field reporter for local TV. When their respective stations force them to collab and travel to West Maryland to cover the snowstorm of the century, the two rivals have to navigate tight living spaces, freezing temperatures, and an undeniable underlying attraction between themselves. This book shines brighter than the series debut, I would say, for me, for First Time Caller. The standout element was Jackson, who does appear in the first book. He's the weatherman who proves to be immensely better, more fulfilling love interest than in the first book, if you read my review on that. Unlike leads who stay emotionally unavailable for 300 pages, much like the character in the first book, Jackson actually steps up when Delia needs him most. His support is especially touching when it comes to Delia's grandfather, who is sliding, unfortunately, into dementia, and that steady presence gives the romance real emotional weight for me. Although the romance is incredibly sweet, the book hits a few snags that keeps it from being a standout for me. I think part of it is the repetition on the slow start of the book. Once Jackson and Delilah get out of their joint storm assignment, the narration loses momentum a little bit for me. The days start to feel a little bit on loop, where they're just pretty much waiting around for the storm to happen, and the emotional stakes doesn't really pick up until a little bit later in the book. Then you've got your cliche tropes. The plot leans heavily on familiar rom-com cliches, such as the forced proximity, and there's only one bed that they have to share, which can occasionally feel overly predictable. Now, like the first book, it does have side characters that are quite well written, because that's what P.K. Borison is really known for. But compared to the first one, there is a lack of them in the second. Compared to the vibrant community that is evident in the first book, the secondary cast here feel noticeably thinner and less memorable. The clear exception is Jackson's 15-year-old twin sisters, Adeline and Penelope, who inject much needed humor and energy into the story, except I just needed a little bit more from them. Ultimately, this is a very enjoyable comfort romance that succeeds largely on the back of Jackson's character and the support he gives Delilah. It settles at 3.5 stars for me because of the repetition at the start at the storm assignment, and because there is a lack of the side characters. All right, so we move on to the next book, which is also a romance book, but this is a YA book, and it is by an Australian Chinese writer. The book is I Hope This Finds You by Anne Liang. Love when a book is set where I come from, because this book is set in Melbourne, Australia, and follows Sadie Wen, a people pleaser. She's school captain and an intense overachiever. To cope with her overwhelming pressure of maintaining her perfect image all the time, Sadie writes brutal, honest, venting emails to people who annoy her and leave them sitting in her draft so that is her escapism, so that she doesn't have to say it to their face, basically. But then disaster strikes when that entire draft folder, where there's a lot of emails, is accidentally sent to the whole entire school. So suddenly Sadie has to deal with the fallout, including facing the person that she has complained about the most, her impossibly handsome, infuriating, smug academic rival and co-captain, Julius Gong. And yes, Julius Gong is very much her nemesis. Right from the start, Anne Liang gives us such a perfect description of Sadie's feelings towards him. And she says, it's hard to believe that someone with such an awful personality could have such pleasing looks, or that someone with such pleasing looks could have such an awful personality. The equivalent of opening up a box with gorgeous silk ribbons and confetti and foil packaging and finding inside it is a poisonous snake. It is such a clever way to describe it, and in just a few sentences you completely understand the dynamics. No wasted words, just instant character chemistry is all I get from it. I think this book will really speak to a lot of readers, especially if, like me, you are Asian and grew up in a Western high school. That was very much my experience, so the high pressure environment of a selective school felt deeply personal to me. And Leanne captures the hyper-specific blend of academic anxiety, family expectation, and the pressure to maintain a flawless reputation with so much precision right here. From the crushing weight of being the good child in a migrant family to the fear of bringing shame of your family name, so much of this is felt painfully real in the best of ways. The banter is such a good write between Sadie and Julius. It is so quick-witted, it's funny, and perfectly pitched for high school students, which is something Anne Liang does really, really well. Julius Gong is exactly the kind of male lead people wish they had in their own school days, or maybe that's just me. He shifts beautifully from cold, arrogant rival to genuinely romantic interest. That's what he likes about Sadie, is not that she's polished. He doesn't like that she's a people pleaser version of her. He likes when she's sharp, unfiltered voices coming through, which she absolutely does with no hesitation when she is speaking to him. At one point, she even kicks him in the shins because she's so frustrated with him. I don't really condone violence, of course, but I did laugh at this scene. There is a ton of many fun interactions between Sadie and Julius, but one of my favorite happens after the emails are exposed and they get called into the principal's office. They have just had a full-on argument in front of the entire school level, so obviously they know they're in big trouble. But before they even go in, they start bickering about who has to walk through the door first. That kind of petty back and forth is exactly the sort of thing I love throughout the book. Once they get to the door, Sadie says that he can go in first, but he refuses to budge. And Sadie goes, "So what are you afraid of?" And he's like, "I'm not scared. I just don't want to be the first to step inside." So obviously Sadie snorts at him and tells him, "This is so childish of you." And he fires back, "You're being childish. I'm just being chivalrous." Julius very much has that classic modern Mr. Darcy charm, complete with flawless hair and a habit of blushing whenever Sadie catches him off guard, which honestly sets a very high standard for a love interest, I would say. Another favorite character of mine in the book is Sadie's ride or die bestie, Abigail. She is exactly the kind of loyal bestie everybody needs, especially when the whole school turns on Sadie after the email disaster. Even when everyone is starting to just stare and gossip, Abigail stands firm in her corner. At one point she tells Sadie, maybe it's just because of how gorgeous we are that they are staring at us. I would stare at us too. And honestly, very good queen behavior, I say. Abigail is also very genuinely funny in the book. There's a scene on the bus when Sadie is so embarrassed she starts lightly hitting her head against a window, only to realize that horror of horror that Julius is watching her. Abigail immediately jumps in and says in the loudest voice possible, "It's great to see that the windows are so sturdy, Sadie. Thank you so much for testing that out for me." Absolute elite damage control, this girl. Unlike a lot of contemporary YA romances that can feel disconnected from real teenage life, this one grounds its humor in genuine emotional stakes. Sadie Poppy's character growth is fantastic as she slowly lets go of her exhausting good girl persona and starts embracing who she really is. She's really sharp, she's funny, and far sassier than the polished version of herself. I love that even though she starts out being really annoyed by Julius, she gradually becomes one of his biggest sort of supporters, even standing up to his unbearable and insufferable brother James. I could go on about how irritating that this man James is, but I will spare you and you can go read it yourself. But just know that he nicknames his little brother Juzi, which means tangerine in Chinese, simply because he thinks it sounds adorable. It makes no sense, but he says it with such confidence that you almost have to admire the audacity of why would you nickname someone that. It was such a standout read for me this month. It combines a deeply relatable Chinese-Australian high school experience with a dream-worthy academic rival in Julius Gong. And for me, it was pretty much perfect from start to finish, an easy 5-star read for me. And on a fun note, if you do love Julius as much as I did, you can also read I Hope This Finds You, a very short companion novella from his point of view by Anne Ling as well. It's only about, I think, 39 pages, so it's a super quick bonus read if you want to read about him and not leave him behind so soon. Alright, so I was in my contemporary romance era this month for sure, because the next book I read was also hyped on Book Talk. It is People We Meet on Vacation by Emily Henry. It is widely praised as contemporary romance, but tries to capture the nostalgic magic of the classic friends to lovers trope, but ultimately struggles to ground its conflict in relatable reality for me. The story follows two absolute opposite, Poppy Wright, a chaotic, stylish travel journalist living in New York City, and Alex Nielsen, a quiet, structured high school teacher who prefers staying in his small Ohio hometown. Despite their complete different lifestyle, they share a strict tradition of taking a week-long summer holiday together every single year. After an unspoken incident that happened during a trip to Croatia caused a bitter 2-year estrangement, Poppy then convinces Alex to take one final budget-friendly trip to Palm Springs for Alex's brother's David's wedding in a desperate attempt to fix their broken friendship, is the plot of the story. I'm not going to deny Emily Henry is a very skilled writer. For readers who enjoy a breezy, atmospheric vacation aesthetic, her ability to paint distinct travel backdrops is technically very, very impressive. But unfortunately, the technical quality of the writing cannot save characters that simply aren't my cup of tea. The plot lacks genuine narrative momentum, dragging readers through a repetitive cycle of past holidays that detailed the mundane things that got up each year without offering any real substance, in my opinion. Rather than feeling a deep, palpable sense of yearning between the long-term friendship, the emotional progression feels stagnant and incredibly boring as a book. The romance relies on deeply frustrating timeline choices. A major point of annoyance for me is the narrative insistence of having the characters cross physical boundaries and do it first before they even sit down to sort out or declare their true feelings. So, like very many contemporary books, they seem to do it because they're so thirsty for it, but they don't know how they're feeling for each other and never have a proper adult discussion. This backwards approach completely drains the tension and feels like an incredibly privileged modern day trope that prioritizes physical impulses over emotional honesty. Worse still, the reason that keeps Alex and Poppy apart seems very flimsy to me. Their hesitation doesn't come from any true obstacles, in my opinion, but from shallow self-centered anxiety and lifestyle differences. Poppy wants a fast-moving, travel-heavy life, and Alec leans towards a more quieter, small town future. That makes the whole will they, won't they conflict hard to take too seriously, especially when so much of it feels like it could have been resolved with better communication and some therapy. While Emily Henry's talents as a strong writer keeps the text readable, the book ultimately fails to deliver. And for me, this is a 2-star read, which is an unpopular opinion, I know, so please do not come for me, okay. Next book I read is The Second Chance Convenience Store by Kim Hong-yong, and it's been translated to English, obviously. Second Chance Convenience Store is a beautiful, uplifting splice of healing fiction that proves how small, simple acts of everyday kindness can quietly change the trajectory of multiple lives. This is set in a quiet neighborhood in Seoul. The story begins with Mrs. Yom, a retired teacher who runs a struggling convenience store. She loses her wallet and it is found and safely returned to her by a homeless guy named Dok Gong in Seoul Station, who has lost all of his memories from his past due to alcohol-related dementia. In gratitude, Mrs. Yong offers him free meals, which eventually blossoms into an alliance when Dong Gong I feel like I'm saying it wrong. Duke steps up to protect the shop. I'm going to call him Doug because it's easier to say. And then he earns himself a job at the night shift worker. As Doug interacts with the store's eccentric staff and regulars, his unique presence triggers a chain of reaction of healing throughout the community. All while Mrs. Yom's troubled son, though, hires a detective to unearth the dark past of Douglas and is trying so hard to get rid of him, while Douglas is trying so hard not to remember. So the greatest strength of this novel is the highly accessible, easy to follow, and beautifully intersected structure of the book. Written like a series of linked essays, each chapter seamlessly pivots to focus on a different character from a different walk of life who frequents the store. The writer masterfully avoids heavy, depressing melodrama. Even though the characters do face incredibly serious and sad real-life struggles, the tone remains grounded, comfort, and remarkably hopeful. The ensemble brings the local neighborhood to life with brilliant, simple efficiencies. So you have a character named Si Yong. She's a young part-timer who trains Douglas when he starts at the store, and he sort of encourages her to make YouTube videos on instructing, training how to be working at a convenience store, and that ends up landing her a much bigger career than she ever dreamed of. Then you have Song Suk, who is also working at the convenience store. She is a defensive, judgmental daytime worker whose internal biases thinking that Douglas is like a rug, that even wash was still a rug. And that line perfectly captures how she thinks about society and her judgment on it. But he then encourages her to have a better relationship with her son and sort of sends her relationship, her family life into a better sort of momentum. Then you have a man that comes to the convenience store every evening. He's a stressed out sort of office worker, and he does solo drinking at the store because he's escaping his sad life because he thinks his family just doesn't like him. And Douglas subtly steers him towards drinking corn silk tea rather than alcohol, and it helps him reconnect with his family as well. And then you have this frustrated playwright who is suffering from writer's block, and she rents an apartment that is opposite the convenience store, and she can look into it, and she starts talking to Douglas and is inspired by his mysterious background and writes a play about a unique nighttime shift worker in the end. So he's the inspiration for a new writing play. The book does something really fun and clever with this character. Her name is Inkyong. Because she's a playwright looking for inspiration, she decides to write a play about a stray night shift worker with memory loss. This means the play is writing is exactly the same as the book you are reading. It is a fun nod to the reader, especially when the characters start guessing his backstory, wondering he's maybe like a gangster type guy, a spy, or even an alien. This cozy style makes the book feel like the beloved TV show, if you've seen it, called Midnight Diner. And then the way I imagine Douglas is this actor that I've seen in Korean movies, I think it was in Train to Busan, where he looks very like thuggy-like, but actually he's quite gentle like a big bear as well at the same time. Furthermore, the sharp inclusion of Korean K-pop sort of culture humor is in this book, like a co-worker noting that Douglas sitting at the store sipping his coffee with the smooth elegance of an actor named Gong Yong in his famous Canoe coffee ads adds a brilliant immersive layer of visualization for readers if you are sort of knowledgeable about the Korean pop culture there. If you don't, it's just a line. If you do, then you get this added sort of visualization in the book. I think this is an absolute masterpiece of healing fiction. It earns for me a 5-star read for its effortless, simple writing. I think it's quite masterful in linking character arcs between chapter to chapter, and it's a rare ability to address deep human trauma and societal judgment without ever feeling sort of too depressed or sad about the whole experience that you are reading. Which leads me to the next book, which has a similar structure, but it fails to hit the mark. The book is called The Moon Glow Bookshop by Song Dong Wong. I should stop picking these Korean books because I really can't pronounce any of the names. All right, so this book is a confusing contemporary fantasy that tries to capture the healing fiction book of The Second Chance convenience store that I just read. But unfortunately, it falls flat due to jarring writing mechanisms and a very messy magical system and a deeply unlikable main character is what I think. The story takes place in a hidden alleyway at a unique bar called Moon Glow Bookshop. It gets its name not because it sells physical books, but because the bartender Moon, a name that double intends as the Korean word for door, serves customized cocktails that put customers into a dreamlike, sort of dreamy state like a book would. These magical drinks drop a person's consciousness into a story that either reflects their own life, a hidden dream, or a forgotten joy. Moon used to be a guardian at a magical library where every book held a person's personal life story. After being cast out for trying to share these books, he meets Borum, a magical moon rabbit, who gives him an enchanted recipe to turn these memories into healing cocktails. While the premise sounds enchanting and original, the execution suffers from severe structural flaws and technical mistakes that breaks the reader's immersement in the book. The writing frequently utilizes head hopping, which is subtly switching from character perspective right in the middle of a paragraph. For example, in a chapter about a teenage girl named Sohee who suffers from public speaking anxiety, the text will jump confusingly between her desperate internal thoughts and then suddenly to Moon's point of view within a second. The sentence goes with Sohee begging Moon to make more of the drinks because it helped her with her anxiety. Her anxious eyes returned to Moon. Placing her palms together, she pleaded, "But your drinks was great. I breezed through my music performance test. No side effects either." However, the effects didn't last long. After a trip to the toilet, her anxiety returned. "Please, I beg you, just one more bottle." Then just following this, it switches to Moon's point of view because it goes straight into Sohee was close to tears. Moon could feel Borum's intense gaze. It looked like she was on the girl's side. Then it goes, "Just one bottle, isn't it okay?" Her eyes seem to be asking, so whose point of view is it? It should be back to Sohee who's thinking or saying it. Then it sounds like it's still Moon's POV that is viewing it. So I get very confused with those sentences where you're finding yourself as a reader reading the same paragraph over and over again because it quite doesn't make sense and it doesn't quite flow nicely in your head. This constant perspective shifting makes it incredibly tiring for the brain to comprehend who is speaking or who is thinking, and it destroys the flow of the book for you. And then you've got the fantasy elements in the book, which lacks clear rules or regulations because it feels like the author is just following random whims rather than building a cohesive world. For instance, the first customer drinks a cocktail and sees memories of their actual past, but then another young woman drinks one and sees a mystical story about a fairy, leaving the reader confused as to what the drinks are actually supposed to do. Because each customer, like in the last book, only gets one chapter, the character feels really shallow and their dilemma very surface level. The story also takes a convoluted roundabout path to simple points. In Sohee's chapter, for example, her public speaking anxiety suddenly turns into a lesson about not living your life for others, which makes the emotional payoff feel unearned. After a strong opening with the great twist of the book, the later chapters mostly left me underwhelmed and asking, oh, is that it? Is that the moral of the story for this person? The expected warmth of a healing sanctuary is entirely absent because Moon, the main protagonist, completely lacks empathy and warmth in the way he delivers. He openly states that the bookshop is merely a door to pass through, not a place to grant wishes, leaving the reader to wonder why he even bothered bringing struggling people inside in the first place if they have to solve it themselves. The book also suffers from severe tonal inconsistency. It frequently dives into dark, heavy undertones, including customers whose lives are actually falling apart due to substance addiction, only to immediately whiplash you into a cutesy, cozy fantasy aesthetic featuring pretty pink drinks and a waitress with bunny ears. This creates a jarring contrast that completely clashes with the cozy cover art of the book. To top it off, the author throws in an unexpected time travel element at the very end of the book, which I think is poorly explained, and it leaves the reader, or at least myself, entirely sort of bewildered about what actually happened and the understanding of what actually happened. Whilst the concept of turning life stories into healing cocktails is highly imaginative, the writing was messy and I think poorly executed. It received a low 2-star from me. Because the stories failed to link together, the main character is ultimately unlikable. The writing mechanics are exhausting to read, and the chaotic blend of dark, addictive themes, cozy bunny ears, and the unexplained time travel makes for a complete nonsensical read at the end of the day. All right, so from fantasy, we jump into cozy romance fantasy in Summons to the Wild by A.K. Caggiano. Caggiano is the name, I think. This is a fantastic fantasy romance sequel that brilliantly captures on its unique narrative voice, which transforms its initial frustrating characters dynamic into something a bit more rewarding, I found, in this second installment. This is the second installment in the Villains and Virtues series. The story continues the chaotic journey of Emma, a sunny, sweet-natured heroine, and Damien, a brooding, grumpy dark mage. Having survived the initial encounters with each other, the unlikely duo must now venture into unpredictable, magical dangers of the wilds, hence the name. Now, a quick spoiler alert here, because I do need to go back into the first book to give you the summary of the second installment. And you do need to read them in order, and this book follows straight from the first book. So the main quest of the book is that Damien needs to find a way to free his demon father. And the father is trapped in a highly secure vault that belongs to the king. He then creates this talisman that is able to be absorbed into the body of the person that he wants to control. But unfortunately, instead of placing this talisman onto the king, then controlling him to release his father, along the way in the first book, Emma comes across him and she touches the talisman, and it actually gets absorbed into her. And now it is in her, and she's being controlled by Damon if he utters some magical words. And the only way to get it out of her is to unalive her. But he doesn't want to do that because secretly he has some feelings about it, and he doesn't want to sort of just get rid of it innocent for no reason at all. So they basically have to try to find a way to magically remove the talisman out of Emma's body, so then now he can use it to the king and hopefully release his father. So in this second book, you've established that Damien has feelings for Emma. Emma is still got the talisman, but she's a little bit more confident in this world now, and she's a little bit coming into her own. And their quest is still going on, where they have to go to different locations to find different magical creatures that might be able to release this talisman out of Emma. And so it turns into a bit of a road trip into the wilds, into the forest. The story is structured around a series of wild, high-stakes side quests as they try to unlock secrets and stay alive, including journaling underground and coming face-to-face with seductive vampires, from that to trekking into tropical jungles to seek out obscure witches, where Emma begins to learn the rules of magic and uncovers maybe a little bit of her own. This is a massive step up from the series debut, Thrown in the Dark, which is the first book, which I gave it a bumpy 3.5 stars. In the first book, we have to get used to the grand writing styles of the book, a style that I recently looked up to mean using long, complicated or exaggerated words in an attempt to impress others, often to the point of sounding pompous, pretentious, and insincere, which was the whole point of the writer, to poke fun at high fantasy writing that they've experienced probably in the past. And this is a satire of that genre with romance thrown into it. So an example of that is, say the normal sentence would be, I am tired and going to bed because I have to wake up early tomorrow. Whereas in the grand writing of the way that this book would write it is, I must now surrender my weary corpus to the velvet embrace of nocturnal slumber as the pending dawn demands my prompt and punctual resurrection. So you see how initially, if you're not used to that type of writing, when you start to read it, especially as I did in the first book, I found it very hard to comprehend what the sentence is trying to tell you. But after a while, if you can get through it, you will get used to it. Once your brain adapts to the specific rhythms and meta humor of this author's storytelling ability, the narrative flows much smoother, allowing the witty banter and the cozy yet dangerous atmosphere of the wilds to shine through without fatiguing the reader's brain. Also in the first book, the secondary characters were quite rude to Amma. Damien was frustratedly demanding and controlling, and his pet, the crude imp, was downright unlikable, frequently hurling misogynistic insults at her. Thankfully though, Summons to the Wild completely fixes those issues. The biggest triumph of this sequel is the dramatic growth in character dynamics. You have Damien who softens. The grumpy meets sunshine dynamic truly begins to blossom here. Damien is already falling really hard for Amma, causing his controlling attitude to melt into a fierce, deeply caring protectiveness. And Damien is an infernal creature who isn't supposed to like feel human affection, but his growing love for Amma completely breaks his brain, and he's expressing these feelings through involuntary intense cinema roll acts of protectiveness, which is really lovable to read. And then you've got the imp who turns around. He's no longer rude to Amma. He tones down his hostility and starts to be more enjoyable as a side character. And then, of course, you've got Amma's true agency. Most importantly for the book, Amma is no longer just along for the ride. She gains specifically more control over her own life, stepping into her own power, making her own decisions, and flexing genuine agency. That makes her a fantastic protagonist to root for, and she's very, very likable. Amma was raised as a prism, sort of like very virtuous lady, but she is realizing that she wants to choose her own destiny and embrace her darker and maybe assertive side. Stellar sequel to a book because the characters are definitely more written, whether the author got those feedback from the first book and decided to sort of change their trajectory. Either way, it is a much more enjoyable character read because she gives Amma now her well-deserved agency. She softened Damon into a protective love interest, and she lets the reader fully adjust to the sort of lemony Snickers-esque writing style. This book easily got me up to 4.5 stars at the end. All right, we're up to my last two books, so thank you so much for bearing with this long recap, but I've got two more books to go, and of course, as always, if you have enjoyed listening to me, don't forget to like and subscribe and share because we're helping my small channel to grow. All right, so the second last book is The Girl with a Thousand Faces by Sung Ying Dee. The Girl with a Thousand Faces is a haunting, atmospheric, historical dark fantasy. Effortless blends 1990s style gangster grit with traditional Chinese ghost folklore. The book is set in Hong Kong. The narration initially starts to center around Mercy Chan. She is a middle-aged woman suffering from amnesia. She doesn't know who she is, and she works for a triad. And her skill is that she is able to speak to ghosts and exorcise them. Mercy makes her life as a ghost talker for the local triad, managing the furious spirits that haunts the alleys in this city. However, her life is unraveled when a terrifying power water spirit begins unaliving people and drowning them in the district. This monster spirit claims to hold the key to Mercy's lost childhood, forcing her into a dangerous body-swapping supernatural mystery that unleashes a dark, forgotten past. For me, the greatest part of this book lies in Mercy's present-day point of view. This segment is highly action-packed, fast-moving, and brilliantly anchored in sort of like a 1970s and 1980s style Hong Kong triad underworld. Navigating sort of the filthy gutters, cramped alleyways, and gangster politics makes the world building incredibly immersive and nostalgia for fans of this classical cinema movies that you might have watched in the past. Despite this complex plot layers involving very dramatic twists, identity shifts, and the changing of potentially bodies, Sung Ying Dee prose remains absolutely excellent in making sort of a flawless lead of when this happens. The puzzle box narration is structured quite smoothly, it's accessible for readers, and it's easy to follow along, ensuring that the reader is deeply absorbed rather than confused at what's happening in this story. What fell short for me was making the theme very heavy-handed for me. While the present-day timeline is an exhilarating ride, the book hits a significant speed bump when it flashes back to the past. The historical chapters, which detail the slow, painstakingly creation of the girl with 1,000 faces, suffered from a much slower, repetitive pace. The days in these sequences felt stagnant because maybe there was not a lot going on and there was not a lot of characters. It felt like a loop, dragging down the momentum that was established early on with the triad action. Additionally, the central theme messaging regarding how profound family trauma passes down from generation to generation is handled with a very heavy-handedness. While the exploration of grief and ancestral scarring is heartbreaking and very real, the delivery occasionally feels overly explicit. I think a more subtle, nuanced approach to the generational trauma would have elevated the narration weight. Trust the reader to understand that the underlying narrative within the story and what the girl with 1,000 faces is meant to represent. Like, trust us to know what it is talking about rather than having to shove it down our throats, basically. But apart from that, it was a definitely good fantasy, highly imaginative with its dark urban sort of feeling to it. It did earn a 4-star review from me because the action-packed triad world was seamless. The body swapping and writing was brilliant and simple to follow along, though it does just lose a star for the repetition, the slow-paced historical past, and a slightly heavy hand on the themes that it was trying to portray. Okay, so we've come to our final book. It is by an Australian writer because I want to support more Australian writers, of course, in my reviews and my reads. And this one is called An Academic Affair by Jodie McAllister. This is a smart Australian academic rom-com that nails rival to lovers and marriage of convenience. It follows literature academics, Shady Sean and Jonah Fisher, long-term rivals whose competition for a job in Hobart turns into a fake marriage arrangement because apparently in academia, if you are an academic and you get a job somewhere and you have a partner that's also in academia and is able to be hired, they also get a job as well, which is lovely for them, isn't it? Now, this is an Australian setting, academic politics and familiar dialogue in Australian sort of colloquial wording that makes this feel especially cozy and relatable for me. And Sadie and Jonah's chemistry work because their rivalry is rooted in intellectual equality and mutual respect. Jonah's supportive side, especially in how he shows up for his sister, gives the romance real heart. While the slow burn tension and long-term pining between the characters are incredibly satisfying, the comic timing doesn't really quite hit the heights of some genre heavy lifters like maybe Ali Hazelwood, who I love. So there was some laughs, but not as many as I want, especially because the book is so simple. You were wanting maybe a bit more ha-ha in the banter and a bit more sort of Australian humour injected into there. The book does rely heavily on intellectual sparring and literally footnotes rather than fast-paced, laugh-out-loud comedy, which is what I was looking for. If you are diving into this expecting quick, witty and chaotic humour to break up the tension, the dialogue I think can occasionally feel a bit more subdued and dry by comparison. Still though, the writing is very excellent and easily to digest, which is why I still kept it at a very strong 4-star read for me. It's warm, it's clever and perfect if you like or love academic romance with an Australian feel to it. And already, I think later this year, looking ahead, book 2 is going to come out, a book called A Study in Sparkling. The universe of these two characters expand out, and Jonah's sister is the next love interest and she's looking for a second chance romance. Her name is Fiona and she's just come out of a really bad marriage breakup. She has 2 little kids that she's looking after. Her ex, Matt, is a betrayer, a cheater, and she finds a second chance romance with Satoshi, who is a popular young wine bar owner. And he does appear in the first book because he supplies Sadie and Jonah with very premium alcohol. And they do have an age gap, so there's that trope as well in there, plus second chance. So I'm looking forward to it if it's similar vibes and similar writing style. And that is my wrap up finally of my latest reads for May. We had a massive 5-star read this month, I think, which was great. But of course, it cannot be perfect. While we definitely had to navigate through some 2-star territory with the messy execution of the Moon Glow Bookshop and of course the people we meet on vacation that was a bit of a letdown because I had high expectations on it. But honestly, that is the beauty of reading, right? We all have our different perspective. Every book takes us on a completely different journey, even if that journey occasionally involves a fake marriage just to secure a job in Hobart. Now, I want to hear from you. Which of these books have you read? Which one might end up on your TBR from the review? Do you like second chance romances? Do you like second chance live? If you enjoy my wrap-ups and you want to let me know, like, subscribe, and I will see you on the next one. So happy reading, stay cozy, and bye for now.